It feels like every day the industry is on fire, whether it's Sony with them moving off of physical media, to them seemingly being detached even from their fan base, who's also going back and forth as to how Sony is going to approach something like $1,000 PlayStation 6. It's all over the place there. And then with Microsoft, they're laying off thousands of people, studios are closing, a big Xbox reset is ongoing. And then you have the weird platform holder that's like off on the other side of the room, minding their own business. That's not actually brought up as much in any of these conversations, and that's Nintendo. And I've noticed on social media more and more with all this stuff happening with Sony and Microsoft, people are starting to look at Nintendo and go, "Were we were they right? Like this whole time?" I'm seeing that. And I wanted to explore that a bit because there was an interesting interview with Shigeru Miyamoto with the 40th anniversary for Famitsu. There's a bunch of quotes flying around, but it did make me think a bit about Nintendo's philosophy and how they view gaming and even just approaching a console like the Switch 2. So if you guys enjoy the video, hit the like button, subscribe if you're new. So it is hard not to notice the chaos in the gaming industry that's like daily at this point. But I have noticed that Nintendo is kind of out of those conversations more and more as we go along. So as I was seeing these quotes pop up from Miyamoto, I was like, yeah, okay, that kind of plays into some of the stuff that we're seeing. So, for example, in this case, just kind of discussing the Switch, it not being on the same level technically as the PlayStation and the Xbox because it wasn't. It was a weaker system overall. But he says, first of all, I was happy that the Switch lasted for 8 to 9 years. I think that customers are no longer just looking for specs. I think the ideal is that if you buy the software, you can play it on the device you have at home. And I think Sony is working off that well right now in the sense that they have latched on in the mainstream. And Sony is the default system for the yearly games. Madden's, NBA, Call of Duty, FC, uh, even the Fortnite seasonal updates. People, I'm sure, are playing mostly on PlayStation for a lot of that stuff, right? And Sony shows it in their own financials that they are heavily reliant on third-party games and add-on spending. Battle passes, microtransactions, that actually takes up more than digital game purchases and physical game purchases for Sony combined. It's all add-on content. And little concerning there if you're Sony because their first party games do indeed make up a much smaller amount of revenue just outright. But with Nintendo, they've obviously looked at gaming with hardware much differently ever since the Wii. Like the GameCube didn't do well for them. They completely flipped the table completely and went with the Wii. It was weaker than 360 and the PS3, but it was very different as well and did appeal to the pick up and play mainstream. I mean, the Wii Sports still to this day, if you put it in front of somebody, a little older who remembers that time period, I guarantee they'll want to pick up a remote and play. Like, oh, hold on, you got Wii bowling on here? Let me get in on that. Or you got even Wii boxing or golf or tennis. It's like immediately it kicks in that nostalgia wave, and you're like, yeah, I'll go ahead. I'll get a couple of rounds in here. Sure. He talks about chasing trends, right? Like how we see that a lot with companies currently saying the reason Nintendo enjoys such strong global support is simply that we don't start by asking what's trending right now. Instead, we focus on who we're actually doing this for. He goes on to say, I really dislike terms like depreciation or recouping costs. And that sounds like that'd be more from the artist in Miyamoto, because there are business people at these companies that are like, okay, maybe not that much for the budget, but you get what I'm saying. Sometimes you make a game because you do want your brand or your system to be unique. You want it to be just like Nintendo's is like uniquely Nintendo, right? So they'll make weird games, but they'll also make bets that maybe don't pan out and they'd rather see it through than cancel it. And I mean, Metroid Prime 4 is probably one of the best examples of this. Did the game come out how I wanted it to? No, I didn't think it was an incredible game or anything. I don't think it lived up to what we've known the Metroid Prime series to be. But Nintendo, instead of canceling the game, they then restarted development, sent it to the US with Retro Studios, which would not be a cheap development. And it went on so long, they ended up in the Switch 2 generation with the thing. Announced it at the beginning of the Switch 1. Didn't come out to the Switch 2. So for their credit, I think they definitely lost money on that game. I don't see how they could have made money on that game at this point. It would have had to sell millions, millions of copies, and maybe someday it will, but it has not at this point. So that's kind of the point is they ask first, okay, who are we actually doing this for? Not, oh wow, Fortnite's trending. I wonder what we should do with that. Now they have still approached some of these different genres. I'm thinking of Splatoon Raiders most recently, where that is I mean, if you look at it, it's a looter shooter, but it's done in the sense that it still feels like a complete game when you buy it, and it doesn't have to be this online forever game. Nintendo's also thinking about their other presence outside of just games and lining things up. The Mario Galaxy movie, Miyamoto mentioned, hey, we knew Yoshi was going to be in there. We knew Fox was going to be in there. So we made sure there was a Star Fox game. And yes, it was a remake of the N64 Star Fox again. But he says here, when it comes to remakes, some people might say that there are a lot of remakes, but after 5 years, a lot of people have outgrown games and stopped playing them. Young people today don't have the opportunity to play games from 10 years ago, so remaking them to be more playable and releasing them again is a good way to meet demand. Letting people know the original games also leads to future developments, so we've been actively pursuing that recently. That's the thing that Nintendo keeps in mind constantly. It's like, hey, there is, I guess you'd call generational turnover. So Nintendo, they continue to focus in on their big franchises like Mario, Zelda, Animal Crossing you'd put up there, and they continue reintroducing them. And yeah, part of that would be through remakes, but they also have NSO, which is, I think, a big way to at least familiarize, you could even say educate some of the younger gamers out there with classics. And if you're a bit older like I am and you've shown kids any of these games and they go, why does it look this way? You go, man, where are we? But that's the idea with a remake, right? It'll at least bring them into a more modern game that they can look at and go, okay, this looks like something I would play. It sounds bad, but man, when you have kids, you'll see. It's yeah, they look at those N64 graphics like, is there something wrong with this game? And I just want to go back for a moment to the hardware side, because we are seeing diminishing returns across these different platforms, and the Switch 2 is becoming more and more viable when it comes to third-party games, to where I mean, it's down to frame rate at this point, because there are games where they just chop the frame rate in half, and it's 30 FPS on the Switch 2, but the image quality has gotten a lot better. And so I don't know if we're in a position where someone who has become accustomed to, especially now with the PS5 and the Xbox Series, where many of those games have performance modes, and they'll at least attempt 60 FPS with varying levels of image quality. I don't know if we're in a position where they look around and go, well, yeah, I'm good with 30 on most of these third-party games, and that just be their primary system. But we might, next gen might be it. I know I'm like, oh, Switch 3, but like way in the distance for that. But they might start becoming accustomed to what the Switch 2 is offering from the convenience angle, and the fact that I don't know what Sony and Microsoft really pitch with the next generation systems, because I don't think anyone really cares about 8K, and I guess it's going to be mostly about ray tracing and better 4K. Like, so this is what I mean. We're going to see games that people will look at and go, it looks better, but is it like $1,000 better? I don't know. So it's going to be the situation where people are probably going to stick with their PS5s for quite a while, and that will only help the Switch 2, because diminishing returns have completely set in, and that does work in Nintendo's favor, the way that they've been setting up their systems over the last couple generations. And Nintendo's online gets brought up a lot because it does feel behind the times to a fault, but also somewhat to an advantage at times, because Nintendo will just kind of ignore certain things that even their investors will beat down their door over. So remember when the whole metaverse thing was going on, and it was a constant push of like, are you guys going to do anything with this? What about NFTs? How do we work that in? And Nintendo was like, I don't know. Maybe we're always looking into new things. And that's all they really left it as. Whereas I'm pretty sure Sony, when they did the PlayStation Stars thing and they had really poor looking shelf for your PlayStation Stars, like collectibles, can we all kind of agree that probably had NFT implications at first? And then they kind of backed off of that, as that field started to look pretty sketchy and like scams and I don't know, PNGs that were a million some odd dollars. I think even Sony started to get cold feet. Ubisoft just went, they just ran straight into the wall and it didn't work. So I guess Sony avoided that. But Nintendo being kind of behind the times with something like that, it seemed to benefit them, even if it was by accident at that point, because let's say it all took off, then Nintendo would have been chasing this entire time starting now. Although I do think it's kind of weird you can't message people on your friends list, and then the friend code thing still being a thing is really weird. That said, hey, you know what? When you got to get people into a room with the voice chat stuff, it's actually not bad. So Nintendo's strange. You can't message people, but you can have like a 4-person Discord room going on with pretty good audio quality with the mic picking you up, and you can be a VTuber as like a character from Star Fox. And the last thing where Nintendo's going to be the odd one out, and I mean it's technically good, physical media. So Sony moving away from it. Microsoft they're out too. I'll just tell you that, like they are the most digital at this point with what they've been doing with Game Pass. And I mean the Blu-ray disc that they use for their Xbox series, it doesn't even hold 100 gigabytes. It's stuck at 50. So like they've already been on this train for a bit, all right, in terms of their own platform. And with that and Sony moving away January 2028, Nintendo's kind of going to be the one that's offering physical media, even if it's somewhat like I'm saying that Game Key Card is out there, right? And tons of backlash on that. And I get it because it's not on the cartridge. And it's annoying because it is a disadvantage to buy it at retail, but still have to download the whole game and take up potentially 50, 60, 70 gigabytes on your internal storage that's already struggling. You download Final Fantasy 14 and then Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, your storage is full on the Switch too. Like that's it. But when I'm looking at this, people are starting to look at Game Key Cards and go, oh, maybe I was too harsh. I don't know about that, but it's pretty clear that there could have been another a split in the timeline where Nintendo said, you know what? It's just digital. And so with that, I'm a little surprised Sony didn't explore more like how Nintendo is, where they have the Game Key Cards, where they do split up, and they're like, hey, if you want it physically, it's going to be more expensive than digital. Like, that's what I figured Sony would have done. It's like, hey, you know what? If you still want to buy a Blu-ray from us, the game's $90 or something. Sure, maybe it has a slip cover or a manual, but like we're not going to have it priced the same, and it's going to be more of a boutique thing. You have to order on our website. They did none of that. There's like, nah, it's just digital from now on. And the thing that's interesting about Nintendo, I do think they value the retail space for like their hardware, sure, and their games. But I think that's also because they sell so many things outside of that. Their amiibos, they had like Alarmo. They show up one day with Labo. Yeah, like obviously controllers, accessories, all kinds of stuff that's there to add on to it. But because they do sell quite a bit to the mainstream and the families, I think they do look at the physical retail space as quite important to them. So I kind of, okay, obviously they're going to be doing physical for the rest of this generation. I think they're doing physical in the next generation as well. If I had to take a guess. So they very well could be coming up to the 2040s and still have some kind of cartridge in stores. I say some kind of cartridge because next generation, it might just be all Game Key Cards, but you can technically still sell, trade, do whatever with your Game Key Cards. And yes, in the hierarchy of game formats, technically it is above digital and code in a box. So it has some advantages there. And you know what would be the most Nintendo thing to do going into the end of this year? That would be taking The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time Reborn and releasing it a week before GTA 6, because funny enough, it kind of looks like that's how it will line up. And again, that'd be the most Nintendo thing. Everyone's trying to avoid GTA 6. They're trying to get out of the way. Not everyone can be Godzilla or the Barbie collection. I get it. But Nintendo would be the one to show up with a remake of this legendary game that they have, one of their biggest franchises, and go, you know what? It's out within days of this generational release that is GTA 6. Nope. Here comes Ocarina of Time, and we're just going to go ahead and drop it in November because that's just how they are. And I mean, GTA 6 isn't on the Switch 2, so in that sense, they don't really need to necessarily worry about crossover with their platform. but that is a game that Microsoft and Sony are heavily relying on to hit certain quotas, we'll say, in their fiscal year, and Nintendo probably not even really thinking about it right now. And finally, I don't want to diminish some of the things that Nintendo does it's not good. Obviously, their games tend to be more expensive and they stay expensive, and that can be quite frustrating to deal with because you're like, I'll wait for a sale, and then a sale just doesn't really happen. And if it does happen, it's hey, it's 15% off or something like that. We had the whole Joy-Con drift situation, and it doesn't really seem like they did a lot to remedy that with the Switch 2. Obviously, massive amounts of legal actions that they take, shutting down fan games, going after people, and at times just trying to prove a point. And it's so with that in mind, I get it, but I do look around at where we are with the industry right now. And man, it's just, maybe the industry has fallen so much. Maybe it's constantly on fire to the point where Nintendo actually looks a bit better than they did. I mean, just a year. Think about a year ago, it was people were mad at Nintendo, dropped the price, game key cards and stuff, and now it's like, huh, maybe Nintendo wasn't so bad after all. That's where we are right now. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below in the comments. Do you agree that you're starting to see people kind of come around a bit on Nintendo with the Switch 2 just because of the situation that PlayStation and Xbox have found themselves in over the last few months? Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.